The great hall fell silent as Commander Zekthara limped into the chamber. His massive form cast long shadows across the polished floor. The alien warrior's blue-green skin bore deep scars from countless battles. His forearms hung heavy at his sides, and his large eyes held a haunted look that made even the bravest council members shift uncomfortably in their seats. Zekthara had once been the pride of the Vorthic Empire. He had conquered 12 worlds and brought glory to his people. Now he stood before the High Council as a broken warrior, the sole survivor of the Third Solar War. The war that was supposed to be their greatest victory had become their most crushing defeat. Council members, Zekthara began, his voice deep and raspy. I stand before you today to tell you the truth about the humans. What I'm about to say will sound impossible. You may think I have lost my mind, but every word I speak is true. The council leader, an ancient Vorthak with silver skin and wise eyes, gestured for him to continue. Tell us what happened, Commander. Help us understand how we lost to such a primitive species. Zekthara's gills fluttered nervously. He had practiced this moment for months, but finding the right words was still difficult. How could he explain what the humans had done? How could he make them understand? When our scouts first found Earth, he said slowly, we thought it would be an easy victory. The humans had just learned to travel between stars. Their ships were slow and clumsy. Their weapons were simple metal projectiles and crude nuclear bombs. Our intelligence report said they were a young species that had barely left their homeworld. He paused, remembering those early days when victory had seemed certain. We had fought hundreds of species across the galaxy. We knew how wars were won and lost. We had rules, strategies, and proven methods. The humans should have surrendered after the first battle. That is what every intelligent species does when faced with superior force. The council members nodded. This was basic military doctrine that every Vorthic child learned. When faced with overwhelming odds, a wise leader surrenders to save lives. But the humans, Zekthara continued, the humans were different. They did not follow the rules. He began to pace, his heavy footsteps echoing in the silent chamber. Our first encounter was near Jupiter, the large gas planet in their solar system. My fleet intercepted a human cargo vessel called the New Dawn. It was carrying supplies to one of their outer colonies. The ship was old and poorly armed. We had 20 warships. They had 1 merchant vessel. Zekthara's eyes grew distant as he remembered that day. I opened communication channels and demanded their surrender. This was standard procedure. Most species would have immediately given up. But Captain Jake Morrison, the human commander, refused. The alien warrior stopped pacing and faced the council directly. He did not just refuse, he laughed. He actually laughed at us. Then he said something that I will never forget. You picked the wrong species to mess with, Bug Eyes. A murmur ran through the council chamber. The casual disrespect was shocking to the formal Vorthak culture. I ordered my ships to disable their vessel, Zekthara continued. We used minimum force, just enough to damage their engines and weapons. The humans should have surrendered then. Any reasonable species would have surrendered. He shook his head slowly, but Morrison ordered his crew to fight. With their ship crippled and their weapons destroyed, they began ramming our smaller fighters. They used their cargo bay doors as shields. They threw pieces of their own ship at us. When their main power failed, they used emergency batteries to keep fighting. The council leader leaned forward. Surely they could not have caused significant damage? No, Zekthara admitted, but they did not stop. For 6 hours, they fought with everything they had. 6 hours? A normal species would have given up in 6 minutes. When we finally boarded their ship, we found that Morrison had barricaded himself on the bridge with his remaining crew. Zekthara's voice grew quieter. He had been badly injured in the fighting. His left arm was broken, and he was bleeding from a head wound, but he was still giving orders to his crew. When my soldiers broke through the barricade, he looked at me with those strange human eyes and said, "Tell your people we're just getting started." The alien commander's hands clenched into fists. Then he activated the ship's self-destruct system. The explosion killed him and his crew, but it also damaged two of my fighters. They died for nothing. They gained nothing. But they fought anyway. The council chamber was completely silent now. The idea of fighting a hopeless battle was alien to Vorthak thinking. Why die for nothing? I thought Morrison was insane, Zekthara continued. I reported the incident as an encounter with a mentally unstable crew. But similar reports began, coming in from other battle zones. Every human ship fought to the end. Every human colony refused to surrender. Even their civilian transports would try to ram our warships rather than give up. Zekthara began pacing again, his agitation growing. Our military analysts studied the humans for months. They tried to understand this strange behavior. Some believed it was a form of mass hysteria. Others thought it was a cultural ritual, but I was there. I saw their faces, I heard their voices. It was not madness or ritual, it was something else entirely. He stopped and looked directly at the council leader. It was hope. They believed. They could win, even when winning was impossible. They believed that their sacrifice would matter, even when it seemed meaningless. They believed in each other and in something greater than themselves. The council leader's expression was troubled. But Commander, hope without realistic chances of success is merely delusion. How could they maintain such beliefs in the face of obvious defeat? Zekthara was quiet for a long moment. That is what we thought too. After the Morrison incident, I requested additional forces. High Command sent me 50 more ships and orders to end the conflict quickly. We attacked their outer colonies first, thinking that quick victories would break their will to fight. He laughed bitterly. We were wrong. Every colony we attacked became a fortress. Every human we faced became a warrior. Children as young as 10 years old were carrying messages between fighting positions. Elderly humans who could barely walk were maintaining weapons and equipment. Their scientists and engineers turned everyday objects into weapons. Zekthara's voice grew stronger as he remembered the battles. On the mining colony of Kepler 442b, an old human named Frank Davis used industrial equipment to create improvised artillery. He was 70 years old and had never been a soldier, but he held off my entire ground force for 2 days. When we finally reached his position, we found him still working on his makeshift weapons, even though he was dying from his wounds. The alien warrior's eyes were bright with unshed tears. He looked at me and said, "My grandson is fighting on the next world over. I wanted to buy him some time." Then he died. He died happy, knowing that he had helped someone he loved. The council members exchanged worried glances. This was not how wars were supposed to work. Soldiers fought for territory, resources, or political advantage. They did not die happy for abstract concepts like love or hope. The human resistance grew stronger with each battle, Zekthara continued. They learned from their defeats. They adapted their tactics. They shared information across vast distances. When we developed new weapons, they found ways to counter them. When we changed our strategies, they changed theirs. He paused, remembering the growing frustration among his troops. My soldiers began to fear them. Not because the humans were stronger or better armed, but because they never gave up. You could defeat a human army, destroy their ships, and capture their worlds, but you could never make them surrender. They would always find a way to keep fighting. The council leader spoke slowly. You speak of them in the past tense, Commander, but our reports indicate that the humans are still fighting. The war continues. Zekthara's head dropped. No, Council. Leader, the war is over. We lost completely and utterly. The humans did not just defeat us. They taught us that we never understood what war really was. Tomorrow I will tell you about the siege of New Terra, and you will begin to understand why we never had a chance against them. The great hall erupted in shocked whispers as the implications of his words sank in. The mighty Vorthak Empire, conquerors of worlds, had been defeated by a species they had dismissed as primitive, and this was only the beginning of Commander Zekthara's haunting tale. The next day, Commander Zekthara returned to the council chamber. His wounds seemed to hurt more today, and he moved slower than before. The council members waited in tense silence as he took his position at the center of the Great Hall. Yesterday, I told you about our first encounters with the humans, Zekthara began. Today I will tell you about New Terra and how we learned that humans do not think like us. They do not fight like us. They do not die like us. He looked around the chamber, at the faces of his people. New Terra was the humans' first major colony world. It was located in what they called the Alpha Centauri system, only 4 light-years from Earth. The planet had 2 million human colonists and was their most important settlement outside their home system. Zekthara's voice grew stronger as he continued. High Command chose New Terra as our primary target. They believed that destroying this colony would break human morale across the galaxy. If we could show them that their most important world could fall, surely the rest would surrender. The alien commander began to pace slowly. I was given command of the largest fleet in Vorthok history. 150 warships, carrying 500,000 soldiers. We had enough firepower to destroy the entire planet 10 times over. Our intelligence reports said that New Terra had minimal defenses. A few orbital platforms, some ground-based missiles, and a small garrison of human marines. He stopped and faced the council. We surrounded the planet and demanded surrender. This was standard procedure. We gave them 12 hours to respond. Any reasonable species would have seen that resistance was hopeless. The council leader shifted in his seat. And what was their response? They laughed at us, Zekthara said simply. Colonel Lisa Grant, the human commander, opened a communication channel to my flagship. She was a small woman with short brown hair and calm eyes. She looked at me through the screen and said, "You want our world? Come and take it." The alien warrior's expression grew troubled. I thought she was bluffing. I thought she was trying to buy time for evacuation ships. But our sensors showed no ships leaving the planet. No civilians being moved to safety? Nothing. He resumed his pacing. I ordered a demonstration of our power. We destroyed one of their orbital platforms with a single shot from our main guns. The explosion was visible from the planet's surface. Surely this would make them reconsider. Zekthara shook his head. Colonel Grant opened communications again. She was standing in what looked like a command center with humans working at computers behind her. She said, "Thank you for showing us what we're up against. Now we know exactly how to fight you." The council members looked confused. How could witnessing their own destruction help the humans fight? I began the assault the next morning, Zekthara continued. Our first wave consisted of atmospheric fighters and troop transports. We expected to establish landing zones within hours. Instead, we found ourselves in a nightmare. His voice grew quieter. Every building on New Terra had been turned into a fortress. Every street had been blocked with barriers. Every rooftop had human snipers. What we thought was a normal colony was actually a massive military base. Zekthara's hands clenched as he remembered. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was that the humans had no concept of non-combatants. Every human on the planet was a soldier. Old people, young people, scientists, farmers, teachers, all of them were fighting us. He stopped pacing and looked directly at the council leader. I watched a human child, no more than 12 years old, crawl through a drainage pipe to deliver ammunition to fighters on the other side of the city. When my soldiers tried to stop her, she fought them with a knife. A knife! She was not even tall enough to reach my chest, but she fought like a trained warrior. The council chamber was silent except for the sound of Zekthara's heavy breathing. I sent a message to Colonel Grant, he continued. I told her that we would show mercy to the civilians if she surrendered. I explained that in civilized warfare, non-combatants are protected. Do you know what she said? Nobody answered. She said, "There are no non-combatants here. We are all soldiers now. We are all fighting for our home." Then she cut the communication. Zekthara's voice grew stronger. The siege lasted 8 months. 8 months. We had enough firepower to destroy the planet, but High Command wanted to capture it intact. They wanted to use it as an example, to show other human worlds what would happen if they resisted. He laughed bitterly. We learned that destroying a human city is easy, capturing it is impossible. Every building we took during the day they would retake at night. Every position we secured, they would attack from underground tunnels. Every advantage we gained, they would turn into a trap. The alien commander's eyes grew distant. I remember the battle for the main spaceport. We needed it to land our heavy equipment. I sent 2,000 soldiers to capture it. The humans had maybe 50 defenders. It should have been over in minutes. He shook his head slowly. The humans had turned the entire spaceport into a maze. They had built false walls, hidden passages and secret rooms. My soldiers would enter a building and find themselves lost in corridors that led nowhere. They would open doors and find themselves facing human fighters who appeared from hidden panels. Zekthara's voice grew quieter. The humans used their own wounded as bait. They would leave injured soldiers in the open, knowing that we would try to capture them for information. When my medics approached, the wounded humans would detonate explosives hidden in their clothing. The council members looked shocked. This violated every principle of civilized warfare. A human engineer named Pete Rodriguez had been working in the spaceport's maintenance tunnels. Zekthara continued. He was not a soldier. He was just a technician who repaired equipment. But when the battle began, he used his knowledge of the facility to create traps for my troops. The alien warrior's voice filled with reluctant admiration. Rodriguez flooded entire sections with toxic chemicals. He reversed the air circulation systems to blow smoke and gas into areas where my soldiers were fighting. He even managed to electrify metal walkways, shocking anyone who tried to cross them. Zekthara resumed his pacing. But his greatest achievement was the mining laser. New Terra was a mining colony, and they had industrial equipment for cutting through rock. Rodriguez spent 3 months modifying a mining laser into a weapon capable of damaging our ships in orbit. He stopped and faced the council. Think about that. A single human, working alone in tunnels beneath a spaceport, created a weapon that could threaten our entire fleet. He had no military training, no advanced technology, no support from his government. Just his knowledge, his tools, and his determination. The council leader leaned forward. How is such a thing possible? Because humans do not think like us, Zekthara replied. We see a mining laser and think about mining. They see a mining laser and think about all the ways it could be used. We see a maintenance tunnel and think about repairs. They see a maintenance tunnel and think about movement, concealment, and surprise attacks. He continued his account. The laser was hidden in a false maintenance building. Rodriguez had connected it to the colony's main power grid. When he fired it at my flagship, the beam punched through our shields and damaged our main engines. We were forced to retreat to a higher orbit. Zekthara's voice grew heavy with exhaustion. That was the beginning of the end. With our ships farther from the planet, we could not provide close air support to our ground forces. The humans began winning battles. They recaptured the spaceport. They drove my soldiers back to their landing zones. He stopped pacing and stood still in the center of the chamber. I had started the siege with 500,000 soldiers. After 8 months, I had less than 100,000 left. The humans had turned their entire world into a weapon, and every day we stayed, more of my people died. The alien commander's voice was barely a whisper now. I received orders to retreat. High Command said that New Terra was too costly to capture. They wanted to try a different approach. But I knew the truth. We had not just failed to capture one human world. We had learned that every human world would be like this. He looked around the chamber at his people. Colonel Grant sent me a final message as we left orbit. She was standing in the ruins of her command center, surrounded by human children who had fought beside her for 8 months. She said, "Tell your leaders that this is what happens when you threaten our families. Tell them that every human world will fight like this." Zekthara's voice grew stronger. I reported our failure to High Command. I told them that the humans could not be defeated through conventional warfare. I warned them that every human was a potential soldier. Every human building was a potential fortress. Every human tool was a potential weapon. He paused, remembering the response. They did not believe me. They thought I was making excuses for my failure. They gave me a new assignment and told me to forget about New Terra, but I could not forget. None of my soldiers could forget. We had seen what humans were capable of, and we knew that the war was already lost. The council chamber was completely silent as Zekdara finished his account. The implications were terrifying. If every human world would fight like New Terra, how could they ever be defeated? Tomorrow, Zekthara said quietly. Commander Zekthara entered the council chamber for the third day of his testimony. His movements were slower now, and the haunted look in his eyes had grown deeper. The council members noticed that he kept glancing at the shadows in the corners of the room as if expecting something to emerge from the darkness. Council members, Zekthara began, his voice hoarse from the previous days of speaking. Today I will tell you about the ghost ships and why my soldiers began to fear the empty spaces between the stars. He moved to the center of the chamber, but did not begin pacing as he had on previous days. Instead, he stood very still as if movement might attract unwanted attention. After the failure at New Terra, High Command changed our strategy. Instead of attacking heavily defended colonies, we began hunting human supply convoys. We thought this would be easier. Cargo ships are not warships. They carry food, medicine, and equipment, not weapons. They should have been easy targets. Zekthara's voice grew quieter. At first, it seemed to work. We destroyed several human convoys without difficulty. But then strange reports began reaching my command ship. Patrol groups would encounter what appeared to be damaged human vessels drifting in space. When they investigated, the ships seemed abandoned. But my soldiers who boarded them would disappear. The council leader leaned forward. Disappear? What? Do you mean gone? Zekthara replied simply. We would send a boarding party of 20 soldiers to investigate a derelict ship. Hours later, we would find the ship empty and our soldiers missing. No bodies, no signs of struggle, no trace of what had happened to them. He finally began to move, but slowly, as if he were trying not to make noise. The first ship we lost. A boarding party, too, was called the Wandering Star. It was a human cargo vessel that appeared to have been damaged in a meteor shower. The hull was breached in several places and it was drifting without power. Our sensors showed no life signs. Aboard, Zekthara's hands trembled slightly as he continued. I sent Lieutenant Kexver with 20 soldiers to investigate. They were some of my best troops, veterans of dozens of battles. Kexver reported that the ship appeared to have been abandoned quickly. There were personal belongings scattered everywhere as if the crew had left in a hurry. The alien commander stopped moving and stood perfectly still. That was the last communication we received from them. 6 hours later, we detected a faint power signature from the human ship. When we scanned it again, our soldiers were gone. The ship was empty. He resumed his slow movement around the chamber. I led the second boarding party myself. I took 50 soldiers, twice as many as before. We searched every inch of that ship. We found no trace of Kexver or his team. But we did find something else. Zekthara's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Messages written on the walls in our own language. They said things like, "Welcome aboard, and we have been waiting for you." They were written in fresh ink as if someone had just finished writing them. The council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This was becoming more disturbing than they had expected. I ordered my soldiers to secure the ship and prepare it for towing, Zekthara continued. But as we worked, strange things began to happen. Lights would flicker in rooms we had already searched, doors would close by themselves. We would hear footsteps in empty corridors. He stopped again and looked directly at the council. Then we found the first body. It was one of Kexver's soldiers, hanging from a cable in the cargo bay. But when we examined him, we realized he had been dead. For weeks, not hours. His body was cold and stiff, as if he had been in space for a long time. Zekthara's voice grew stronger, but there was a tremor in it now. We found the rest of them scattered throughout the ship. All dead, all appearing to have been killed. Weeks ago, but that was impossible. We had been monitoring the ship constantly. No one had boarded it except us. The alien commander began pacing again, faster now. I ordered immediate evacuation. As my soldiers prepared to leave, the human ship's communication system activated. A voice spoke to us in perfect Vorthic language. It said, "Thank you for visiting the Wandering Star. We hope you enjoyed your stay." He stopped pacing abruptly. The voice belonged to a human woman named Amy Chun. She was the captain of the ship, according to our records. She had been reported dead 3 months earlier when her vessel was destroyed in a battle near Jupiter. The council leader's voice was strained. "How is this possible?" "Dead humans cannot speak." "That is what we thought," Zekthara replied. But Captain Chun was not dead. She was very much alive, and she was playing a game with us. A game that we did not understand until it was too late. He resumed his pacing, but now his movements were erratic, as if he were trying to avoid invisible obstacles. More reports came in over the following weeks. Other patrol groups encountered similar ships. The Phantom's Edge, the Silent Runner, the Dark Star, all appeared to be abandoned derelicts. All were actually elaborate traps. Zekthara's voice grew louder. Amy Chun commanded a fleet of these ghost ships. They would drift into our patrol routes, appearing damaged and helpless. When we sent boarding parties to investigate, the ships would come alive around them. He stopped and faced the council directly. I learned later that the humans had spent months preparing these vessels. They had installed hidden passages, secret compartments, and concealed weapon systems. They had studied our tactics and psychology. They knew exactly how we would respond to a distress signal. The alien commander's voice became more agitated. The humans did not just kill our soldiers. They tortured them psychologically. They would play sounds through the ship's speakers. Voices of our dead comrades calling for help. The cries of Vorthic children. The sound of our homeworld's wind through the trees. He began pacing faster. They used the ship's gravity generators to disorient us. One moment we would be walking normally. The next moment we would be falling toward the ceiling. They would adjust the lighting to create shadows that looked like attacking enemies. They would fill certain areas with gas that caused hallucinations. Zekthara's voice cracked with emotion. Captain Chun herself would appear and disappear like a ghost. She knew the hidden passages better than we knew the main corridors. She would strike at us from behind, then vanish before we could respond. My soldiers began to believe that she was actually dead, that she was some kind of spirit seeking revenge. He stopped pacing and stood very still again. But she was not dead. She was just human. And humans, I learned, are capable of becoming something far worse than ghosts when they are protecting their people. The alien commander's voice grew quieter. I personally boarded the Phantom's Edge, Shun's flagship. I took 100 soldiers. With me, we searched that ship for 8 hours. We found traps everywhere, walls that would close in on us, floors that would collapse under our weight, weapons that would fire from concealed positions. He looked around the chamber at his people. But the worst part was not the traps. The worst part was the crew. Chun had maybe 20 humans with her, but they seemed to be everywhere at once. They would appear in rooms we had already cleared. They would attack us from behind, then disappear into passages we could not find. Zekthara's voice grew stronger. One of her crew members was an engineer named Billy Watson. He had modified the ship's life support system to create pockets of poisonous atmosphere. We would enter a room and suddenly find ourselves unable to breathe. The humans wore crude masks and continued fighting while we struggled for air. He resumed his slow pacing. Watson had also rigged the ship's artificial gravity. He could increase it to crush us against the floor or decrease it to send us floating helplessly toward the ceiling. He turned the ship's own environment into a weapon against us. The council leader asked, "How did you escape?" "I did not escape," Zekthara replied. "Amy Chun, let me go." After 8 hours of hunting us through her ship, she appeared in the corridor where I was making my last stand. She was holding a weapon, but she did not use it. Instead, she spoke to me. His voice grew very quiet. She said, "Tell your people that every human ship they encounter might be a ghost ship. Tell them that we are not just fighting in space and on planets. We are fighting in the darkness between the stars. And we are very good at it. Zekthara stopped pacing and looked at the council. Then she opened an airlock and showed me the way back to my shuttle. As I left, she said, "The war is not going the way you expected, is it?" I could not answer her. I was too afraid. He stood silent for a long moment. The ghost ships continued to hunt us for months. Every time we encountered a derelict vessel, we wondered if it was real or another trap. Every time we boarded a ship, we wondered if we would ever leave it alive. My soldiers began to refuse boarding assignments. They would rather face court-martial than enter another ghost ship. The alien commander's voice filled with exhaustion. High Command eventually ordered us to stop investigating derelict vessels. They said the psychological damage to our troops was too great. But by then, it was too late. The humans had shown us that they could turn anything into a weapon. Even death itself could be used against us. He looked around the chamber one final time. Tomorrow I will tell you about the battle for Earth itself, and you will understand why we never had any chance of winning this war. Commander Zekthara stood before the council for the 4th day of his testimony. The alien warrior looked broken now, his shoulders bent under the weight of his memories. Dark circles surrounded his large eyes, and his hands shook slightly as he prepared to speak. "Council members," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "Today I will tell you about the battle that ended everything. The battle for Earth itself. The day we learned that we had never understood war at all." He moved slowly to the center of the chamber, each step seeming to cause him pain. After 2 years of fighting, High Command decided to end the war with one massive assault. They gathered the largest fleet in our history. 3,000 ships carrying 2 million soldiers. The entire might of the Vorthic Empire aimed at one small blue planet. Zekthara's voice grew stronger as he continued. "We believed that the humans were exhausted. They had been fighting on dozens of worlds for years. Their resources had to be running low. Their people had to be tired of war. We thought that a show of overwhelming force would finally break their spirit." The alien commander stopped and looked at each council member in turn. We were wrong about everything. The humans had not been fighting a desperate defensive war. They had been preparing for this moment since the day we first made contact. Every battle, every defeat, every small victory had been part of a plan so vast that we could not see it. He began to pace slowly around the chamber. Admiral Susan Blake commanded the human home fleet. Our intelligence report said she had only 200 ships, most of them old and outdated. We outnumbered her 15-1. Our ships were newer, faster, and more heavily armed. Victory should have been certain. Zekthara's voice took on a note of grudging respect. But Admiral Blake was not planning to fight us ship to ship. She was planning something that no military academy in the galaxy had ever taught. She was planning to turn an entire solar system into a weapon. He stopped pacing and faced the council directly. When our fleet arrived at the edge of the Earth system, we expected to find the human ships waiting for us near their home planet. Instead, we found nothing. No ships, no defense platforms, no obvious signs of military preparation. Just empty space and the silent planets orbiting their yellow star. The council leader leaned forward. Where were their forces? Everywhere, Zekthara replied. And nowhere. We learned later that the humans had spent decades hollowing out asteroids and turning them into hidden weapon platforms. They had built massive railguns on the moons of Jupiter and Saturn. They had even weaponized the space debris that floated around their planets. His voice grew more agitated. Our fleet moved toward Earth in standard battle formation. We maintained communication silence and followed all proper procedures. We were confident and ready for victory. Then the first asteroid exploded. Zekthara resumed his pacing, but faster now. It was not a large explosion. Just a mining charge that destroyed a single rock in the asteroid belt. We barely noticed it. But within minutes, our long-range sensors detected hundreds of small objects moving toward us at incredible speed. He stopped abruptly. They were not missiles or torpedoes. They were chunks of rock and metal accelerated by hidden mass drivers to nearly the speed of light. Simple, crude projectiles that cost almost nothing to make. but at those speeds they hit with the force of nuclear weapons. The alien commander's voice filled with remembered terror. The humans had turned the entire asteroid belt into ammunition. Thousands upon thousands of projectiles, all aimed at the exact coordinates where our fleet would emerge from hyperspace. They had been calculating our arrival point for years. He began moving again, his steps quick and nervous. Admiral Blake had not just prepared the asteroids. She had prepared everything. As our fleet tried to maneuver away from the projectile, hidden weapons revealed themselves throughout the system. Railguns fired from the moons of gas giants. Laser arrays emerged from what we thought were scientific observation posts. Zekthara's voice cracked with emotion. But the worst surprise came from Earth itself. The humans had built massive magnetic accelerators at their north and south poles. They were using their own planet as a weapon platform, firing projectiles at us from the surface of their world. He stopped in the center of the chamber and stood perfectly still. I was commanding the second wave of our attack fleet. I watched as the first wave was torn apart by weapons that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Ships that had survived 100 battles were destroyed by chunks of metal fired from locations we could not even see. The council leader's voice was strained. Surely your superior numbers still gave you an advantage? Numbers meant nothing, Zekthara replied. The humans had studied our tactics for years. They knew how we would position our ships, how we would respond to attacks, how we would try to protect our command vessels. Every move we made, they had already planned a counter for. He resumed his slow pacing. Admiral Blake finally revealed her main fleet when we were halfway to Earth. Her ships appeared from behind the planet's moon, but they were not attacking us directly. Instead, they were hurting us, forcing us to move in directions that seemed safe but were actually leading us into more traps. Zekthara's voice grew quieter. I realized what was happening when I saw the first human fighter squadrons. They were led by a pilot named Danny Kim. His ships were old and slow compared to ours, but they moved like they were dancing. They would appear from behind asteroids, fire a few shots, then disappear before we could respond. The alien commander's hands clenched into fists. Kim's fighters were not trying to destroy our ships. They were painting targets for the hidden weapons. Every time a human fighter locked onto one of our vessels, massive railgun rounds would arrive seconds later. It was like they could see the future. He stopped pacing and looked directly at the council. But the humans had an even worse surprise waiting for us. As our fleet fought its way deeper into the system, human boarding shuttles began attaching themselves to our ships. We thought they were suicide attacks, desperate attempts to damage our vessels. Zekthara's voice filled with dread. The boarding parties were led by Marine Sergeant Kate Lopez, but she was not trying to capture our ships. She was trying to install something. Small devices that her teams planted in our computer systems before retreating. The council leader asked, "What kind of devices?" "Weapons that attacked our minds," Zekthara replied, his voice barely audible. The humans had learned to hack our neural networks. They could implant false memories, change our perceptions, even control our actions. He began pacing again, but now his movements were erratic and fearful. A communications officer named Ryan Murphy had discovered how to translate human computer codes into patterns that our brains could not resist. When his signals reached our ships, our own soldiers began to turn against each other. Zekthara's voice grew louder and more desperate. I watched my own officers draw weapons on their comrades. They believed they were fighting human infiltrators, but they were actually attacking each other. The humans had turned our own minds into weapons against us. He stopped and faced the council, his eyes wide with remembered horror. The battle lasted 3 days. 3 days of madness and terror unlike anything in our military history. Our ships destroyed each other while human fighters danced between the wreckage. Our soldiers fought phantoms created by their own confused minds. The alien commander's voice dropped to a whisper. On the 3rd day, I received a communication from Admiral Blake. She was standing on the bridge of her flagship, calm and composed. While the space around her filled with the debris of our once mighty fleet, He looked around the chamber at his people. She said, "Commander Zekthara, your war is over. We have disabled most of your ships and neutralized your boarding parties. But we are not going to destroy you. We are going to give you a choice." Zekthara's voice grew stronger. "Blake offered to let the survivors of our fleet return home if we agreed to a ceasefire. She said that the humans did not want to exterminate us. They just wanted us to leave them alone." He began pacing slowly again. I asked her why. Why would they show mercy to an enemy that had tried to conquer them? She said something that I will never forget, because that is what hope looks like, Commander. We choose to believe that even our enemies can learn to be better. The alien commander stopped and looked directly at the council leader. Of the 3,000 ships in our grand fleet, only 200 survived to return home. Of the 2 million soldiers we have brought to conquer Earth, fewer than 50,000 lived to see their families again. His voice filled with exhaustion. But Admiral Blake kept her promise. She let us go. She could have destroyed us all, but she chose mercy instead. The humans had won the greatest victory in galactic history, and their first act was to spare their defeated enemies. Zekthara stood silent for a long moment before continuing. The war did not end with a surrender ceremony or a treaty signing. It ended with a simple message from Earth to all human worlds. Come home, the war is over. We won, he looked around the chamber one final time. Tomorrow, I will tell you about my final conversation with the humans, and you will understand why we can never fight them again. They showed us something more powerful than any weapon, more terrifying than... Commander Zekthara entered the council chamber for the final time. The alien warrior moved differently now, as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. His eyes, though still haunted, carried something that had not been there before. Something that looked almost like peace. "Council members," he began, his voice steady and calm. "Today I will tell you the most important part of my story. The part that changed everything I believed about war, about enemies, and about what it means to be alive in this galaxy." He walked to the center of the chamber with more confidence than he had shown in days. "After the battle for Earth, I expected to be executed. In Vorthak military tradition, commanders who lose their entire fleet face death for their failure. I had lost 3,000 ships and nearly 2 million soldiers. I deserved whatever punishment awaited me." Zekthara paused and looked around the chamber. "But the humans did not execute me. They did not even imprison me. Instead, they invited me to meet with their leaders. They wanted to talk." The council leader leaned forward. "Talk? About what?" "About the future," Zekthara replied. "About what would happen after the war ended. About how our two species might live in the same galaxy without destroying each other." He began to pace slowly, but his movements were relaxed. Now, not nervous or fearful. "I was taken to a space station orbiting Earth. It was called Unity Station, and it was unlike any military facility I had ever seen. There were humans working alongside aliens from dozens of different species. Scientists, engineers, diplomats, and traders all working together." Zekthara's voice filled with wonder. "I met Dr. Maria Santos, a human xenobiologist who had been studying our species for years. But she had not been studying us to find weaknesses to exploit. She had been studying us to understand how we thought, how we lived, how we could be helped." He stopped pacing and faced the council directly. "Dr. Santos told me something that shocked me. She said that the humans had been preparing for peace even longer than they had been preparing for war. Every human world had teams of scientists and diplomats working on ways to communicate with other species, to trade with them, to learn from them." The alien commander's voice grew stronger. "She showed me files that proved the humans had been studying Vortha culture, language, and psychology since our first contact. But they had not been looking for ways to defeat us. They had been looking for ways to understand us." He resumed his pacing, but now his steps were purposeful and confident. "Dr. Santos introduced me to other humans who had been working on what they called the Peace Project. Engineers who had designed better medical equipment for treating alien injuries. Teachers who had developed programs for helping different species learn to work together. Even soldiers who had been trained in nonviolent conflict resolution. Zekthara's voice took on a note of amazement. I asked Dr. Santos why they had prepared for peace when they knew we were coming to conquer them. She said, "Because we hoped that someday you would stop wanting to conquer us and start wanting to know us instead." He stopped pacing and stood perfectly still. That night I was given quarters on the station. I expected to be locked in a cell, but instead I was given a comfortable room with a view of Earth. I could see the planet where I had lost everything, spinning peacefully in the darkness. The council leader asked, "Were you not angry? Did you not want revenge?" "I was angry," Zekthara admitted. "I was angry at the humans for defeating us. I was angry at my own people for sending me to fight an unwinnable war. But mostly I was angry at myself for not understanding what the humans had been trying to tell us all along." He began moving. Again, but slowly and thoughtfully. The next day I met General Chris Palmer, the human who had accepted our surrender. He was a large man with gray hair and kind eyes. He looked like he had seen many battles, but he did not look like a conqueror. Zekthara's voice grew softer. General Palmer sat with me in a quiet room and asked me about my family. He asked about my homeworld, about my experiences as a soldier, about what I hoped to do when the war was over. He talked to me like I was a person, not an enemy. The alien commander's eyes filled with tears. I told him about my offspring, who were still young when I left for the war. I told him about my mate, who had begged me not to go. I told him about the garden I had been planning to build behind my house. He stopped and wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. General Palmer listened to everything I said. Then he told me about his own family, his wife who worked as a teacher, his children who were studying to become doctors and engineers, his parents who had died in the early days of the war. Zekthara's voice grew stronger. I asked him why he was telling me these things, why he was treating me like a friend instead of a prisoner. He said, "Because I want you to understand that we are not so different. We both love our families. We both want to build things instead of destroying them. We both want to live in peace." He resumed his pacing, but now his movements were purposeful and confident. General Palmer offered me something I had never expected. He offered me the chance to help build that peace. He said that the humans needed someone who understood both species, someone who could help them communicate with the Vorthic Empire. The council leader's voice was strained. "And what did you tell him?" "I told him I would think about it," Zekthara replied. "But first, I wanted to understand something. I wanted to know how the humans had won the war so completely. Not just the tactics and strategies, but the deeper reasons. Why they had never given up, even when defeat seemed certain." He stopped pacing and looked directly at the council. General Palmer took me to meet other humans who had fought in the war. Captain Jake Morrison's widow, who had turned her grief into a determination to help war orphans. Colonel Lisa Grant's daughter, who had become a diplomat specializing in interspecies relations. Dr. Maria Santos' son, who was studying Vorthak history and culture. Zekthara's voice filled with emotion. I met human soldiers who had been wounded in the fighting, but who spent their time teaching alien children. I met human scientists who had lost their labs to our attacks, but who were working on better ways to share knowledge between species. I met human engineers who had built weapons to fight us, but who were now designing better ways to explore the galaxy together. He began pacing again, but now his steps were eager and energetic. I realized that the humans had won the war not because they were better at fighting, but because they were better at being human. They fought not because they enjoyed violence, but because they loved peace. They built weapons not because they wanted to destroy, but because they wanted to protect what they had built. The alien commander's voice grew stronger. General Palmer told me the most important thing I learned during my time with the humans. He said, "We did not fight you because we hated you. We fought you because we loved each other. And now that the fighting is over, we want to learn to love you too." He stopped in the center of the chamber and faced the council directly. That is when I understood what the humans had been trying to teach us all along. War is not about conquest or domination. War is about protecting what you love, and peace is about finding ways to love even your enemies. Zekthara's voice grew quiet but firm. I accepted General Palmer's offer. I spent 6 months on Unity Station, learning about human culture and helping them understand ours. I worked with diplomats and scientists and teachers. I helped design programs for cultural exchange between our species. He looked around the chamber at his people. When I returned home, I brought with me something more valuable than any military intelligence. I brought hope. Hope that our species could learn to live together instead of fighting each other. The council leader asked, "And what do you recommend we do now?" "I recommend that we send ambassadors to the humans," Zekthara replied without hesitation. "I recommend that we learn from them instead of trying to conquer them. I recommend that we choose hope over fear, understanding over ignorance, and peace over war." He stood tall and proud for the first time since entering the chamber. "The humans taught me that the strongest species in the galaxy are not those who can destroy the most, but those who can build the most. They are not those who can conquer the most worlds, but those who can make the most friends." Zekthara's voice filled with conviction. "Council members, the war is over. We lost every battle, but we can still win the peace. The humans are waiting for us to choose friendship over conquest. They are waiting for us to become the species we were meant to be." He looked around the chamber one final time. "I have told you the truth about the humans and about our war with them. They defeated us not with superior weapons or better tactics, but with something far more powerful. They defeated us with hope, with love, and with the unshakable belief that even enemies can become friends." The council chamber fell into complete silence as Zekthara finished his testimony. The alien warrior had not just told them about a military defeat. He had told them about a transformation, about the possibility of becoming something better than they had ever been before. The council leader stood slowly. "Commander Zekthara, your testimony has given us much to consider. We will discuss your recommendations and make our decision." Zekthara nodded respectfully. "Council leader, whatever you decide."